Amy Wheeler, an 18-year-old freshman, was on the verge of confronting a terrifying reality that would haunt her for the rest of her life.
I freaked out. But then I thought, well, someone's out there, they're gonna hurt me. I went to the friends upstairs. I banged on the door and I told them that someone killed her.
After a night at the campus party, Amy returned to her dorm only to find her roommate, Stacy Panel, lying lifeless on the bed.
And her underwear had been pulled down, so your gut feeling is that it was sexual assault.
It was a horrifying scene. Blood spattered across the room, painting a gruesome tableau of violence. Chilling evidence lay scattered, each piece more disturbing than the last. The case was so shocking it left even the most seasoned detective stunned, grappling with its complexity. Then, in a spine-tingling twist, an interview surfaced, revealing details so specific, so intimate, that only the killer could have known them.
Her behavior changed. All of a sudden, there was a little red flag. Going, wait a minute, something's wrong here.
But just when justice seemed within reach, the case took a dark turn, deepening the mystery. On October 8, 1985, at around 2:30 a.m., police arrived at a disturbing scene. 18-year-old Stacy Panel lay lifeless on the bed, her left leg resting on the mattress and her right foot touching the floor.
Stacy Panel's body was from her top down. There was a pair of panties around one leg. There was blood around her head and on the bed, on the headboard.
The scene was more than a mere crime. It was a chilling enigma, a puzzle that defied explanation. A pillow had been placed over her head, concealing the brutal truth of the severe injuries inflicted on the left side of her skull. Blood told its own grim story, splattered with violent force across the room. It stained the walls, streaked the ceiling, and reached as far as 9 feet from where her body lay, painting a macabre picture of the violence that had unfolded.
There was a tremendous amount of blood on the walls, the ceiling, and the floor. Her purse was still in there. There was nothing taken. So we kind of ruled out robbery.
A drill rifle, its stock stained with blood and carefully wrapped in a towel, lay discarded on the floor, a silent witness to the horror that had unfolded. Yet what investigators uncovered next would only shroud Stacy's tragic end in even deeper layers of mystery, leaving more questions than answers in its wake.
Someone had broke in to her room close to the head of her bed. It was a small screened window, and it was missing a piece of screen. It had been cut.
Investigators meticulously documented this detail, linking it to the wooden rifle Stacy had proudly carried during parades with the marching band. Once a symbol of celebration and discipline, the rifle was now tainted with blood, its grim transformation suggesting it had been used as the murder weapon.
It's one rifle, which was lying on the floor. It had a lot of blood on the stock, which appeared to be smeared, and around the barrel was a towel.
Forensic experts quickly began scrutinizing the scene, their suspicions growing with each detail. The hole in the mosquito netting of Stacy's room was far too small for an adult to fit through, and the considerable height of the window from the ground added another layer of implausibility. As they delved deeper, the crime seemed to defy logic at every turn. The mystery deepened when they discovered that the missing piece of mosquito netting was nowhere to be found. Forensic analysis revealed no traces of male biological material on Stacy's body, directly contradicting the initial theory. Adding to the chilling reality, the pathologist confirmed that the wooden rifle, once a part of her marching band routine, had been repurposed into a brutal murder weapon.
It had been used to repeatedly strike Stacy in the head, swinging it like a club or a baseball bat. She died of multiple blunt traumatic blows to the left side of her skull. There were at least 3 blows.
Every clue in Stacy's case seemed to obscure the truth rather than reveal it. The absence of defensive wounds suggested she had been caught completely off guard, unable to resist her attacker. Crime scene investigators meticulously collected all potential evidence from her room, yet the tools of the time proved limiting. DNA analysis, not widely available in 1985, meant blood samples and other biological traces went unexamined. To make matters worse, no fingerprints were found on the murder weapon. It appeared the perpetrator had wiped it clean with the towel. Despite the lack of concrete leads, detectives refused to give up hope, relying on forensic experts to unearth something that might point to her killer. They embarked on the daunting task of fingerprinting everyone who could theoretically have entered the women's dormitory. This involved not only interviewing and collecting prints from hundreds of university students, but also extending their efforts to all male staff members. The task was complicated by the dormitory's strict access rules. Only female students lived there, and a special key was required to enter. Men could only gain access if escorted by a resident or an employee with a key. However, as it was common for female residents to invite boyfriends or male friends over, the officers had to gather prints from a vast pool of individuals. Even after this extensive effort, the investigation hit a frustrating dead end. None of the collected fingerprints matched those found at the scene. Every promising lead turned into a brick wall, leaving detectives grappling with unanswered questions. The focus then shifted to piecing together the events leading up to Stacy's tragic death. What began as an ordinary evening spiraled into an unimaginable nightmare. On October 7, 1985, Stacy attended a marching band training session after school, met her boyfriend Tommy Osborne, and later joined a campus party. By 12:30 a.m., she had returned to her dormitory with friends. After chatting in her room, Stacy went to bed around 2:30 a.m. Her roommate, Amy Wheeler, returned to the dormitory shortly after, having lost her keys. She knocked on their door expecting Stacy to let her in, but there was no response. After waiting for a few minutes, Amy knocked on the adjacent room's door, which shared a common bathroom with Stacy's room. Stephanie Alexander, a 21-year-old student living next door, answered the door, awakened by the knocking. Together, the two women decided to check on Stacy, puzzled by her silence. What they discovered would haunt them forever. As they entered Stacy's dark room, Amy immediately sensed something was wrong. One of Stacy's legs was hanging off the bed, an unnatural and unsettling sight. A growing sense of dread consumed Amy as she moved closer, only to be met with a horrific scene. Blood stained the bed, a visceral sign of violence. Overwhelmed by shock, Amy ran out of the room to get help, leaving behind a scene that would become a haunting memory and the center of a baffling mystery.
The first thought in my mind was, I'm going to run outside and get help. But then I thought, well, someone's out there, they're going to hurt me. I went to the friends upstairs. I banged on the door and I told them that someone killed her.
Amy's screams pierced the night, echoing through the dormitory and alerting other students. The dorm guard, alarmed by the commotion, quickly called 911. Within minutes, investigators arrived at the scene, meticulously collecting evidence in the hopes of unraveling the mystery. Meanwhile, panic swept through the dormitory like wildfire. The once lively campus, a hub of learning and social activity, had transformed into a place of fear and uncertainty. Female residents, in particular, were terrified, gripped by the chilling thought that they could be the unknown assailant's next target. As detectives began their work, they turned their focus to Stacy's background, hoping it might offer some clue to the tragedy. Born on September 5, 1967 in Ripley, Mississippi, Stacy was a vibrant young woman with her whole life ahead of her. After graduating high school in 1985, she enrolled at Northeast Mississippi Community College in Boonville. Eager for independence, she chose to live in the dormitory, where she quickly adapted to college life. An active and enthusiastic member of the local marching band, Stacy's life seemed full of promise. Tragically, the wooden rifle she had once carried with pride in parades had now become the suspected murder weapon. With no solid leads, investigators sought the expertise of a criminal psychologist who developed a chilling profile of the killer. The perpetrator was likely a man aged 20 to 24, physically strong, with no prior criminal record. The psychologist suggested the crime was not premeditated, but rather a spontaneous act of violence, the result of seizing an unforeseen opportunity. This theory cast further doubt on the idea that the attacker had entered through the window. The hole in the mosquito netting was far too small for a large adult male to pass through. Determined to leave no stone unturned, detectives turned their attention to Stacy's boyfriend, Tommy Osborne. As someone close to her, he became a person of interest in the investigation. Officers conducted a thorough search of Tommy's room in the male dormitory, scouring it for any evidence that might connect him to the crime. The search marked another critical step in the complex and emotionally charged investigation, as detectives continued to untangle the threads of a case that had shaken the campus to its core.
He did consent to a polygraph. I think he consented to a search. There was nothing in his room of any significance, and he passed that polygraph.
Investigators faced a daunting challenge in determining whether Stacy Panel's boyfriend, Tommy Osborne, could have had any motive for her murder. According to Stacy's friends, their relationship appeared harmonious, with no major conflicts or frequent arguments. Yet as the case unfolded, a revelation from Stacy's parents offered a potential lead, rekindling hope for the investigators struggling to piece together the puzzle of her tragic death. Before starting college, Stacy had been in a long-term relationship with a man named Ben Cox. Their relationship had been serious enough that Ben reportedly hoped to marry her. However, just a few months before enrolling in college, Stacy ended things with Ben, choosing to move forward with her life independently. This detail added a new layer of complexity to the investigation, as detectives now had to consider whether lingering emotions or unresolved tensions from her past relationship with Ben could have played a role in her untimely death.
The statements that we were getting from the girls is that he had come over there to try to see her and she would be gone. They said that Stacy wanted to be able to go out with whoever she wanted to.
He told me that he just didn't want to take no for an answer. He tried to give her an engagement ring. He wouldn't take the ring back. He just kept sending it back to her.
Ben had continued to pursue Stacy relentlessly, even as her departure for college loomed. Despite his efforts, Stacy stood firm in her decision to end their relationship, leaving Ben unable to move on. His inability to let go opened a new avenue of investigation, one brimming with potential but frustratingly devoid of clear evidence. Detectives wasted no time in interviewing Ben. They sought to uncover whether his lingering feelings had escalated into something more sinister. As they questioned him, they remained vigilant for any inconsistencies in his statements or signs that his unresolved emotions might have fueled a darker motive. While the lead was promising, it was still far from definitive, leaving investigators with more questions than answers as they pressed forward in their search for the truth.
They called me and set up a meeting to clear up some stuff, and they just turned on me. They said that they had found hair samples of mine, and they were telling me all this stuff to make me say that I had something to do with it.
Ben claimed he had been at home on the night of October 7, 1985, when the murder occurred. According to his account, he went to bed around 11 p.m. and remained at home through the following morning. His mother corroborated his alibi, stating that she had seen him retire to bed and stay home the next day. While the alibi appeared solid on the surface, investigators knew they couldn't take it at face value. They began scrutinizing Ben's statements and his mother's account, searching for any discrepancies or signs of deception. With no physical evidence linking him to the crime, the detectives were left to weigh the strength of his alibi against the possibility of his involvement, keeping him under close watch as they continued to explore every lead.
My mother worked 3 to 11 shift at the hospital. She was a nurse. She remembered opening my door and seeing me there and on my bed asleep.
Despite Ben's alibi, investigators couldn't rule out the possibility that he might have left the house unnoticed, traveled to Stacy's college, committed the murder, and returned home before anyone realized he was gone. The timeline, though tight, was plausible enough to warrant further scrutiny. Eager to clear his name, Ben agreed to take a polygraph test. This step provided investigators with an opportunity to gauge his truthfulness, though they remained cautious, knowing that polygraph results are not foolproof and could not be admitted as definitive evidence in court. As the test loomed, the question remained: would Ben's responses align with his claims, or would they reveal cracks in his story?
I didn't even get my name right on a polygraph test. And I'm listening to this guy up in my face telling me, you know what the punishment for capital murder is? And I thought, these people really think I done this.
The results of Ben's polygraph test proved inconclusive, leaving investigators unable to determine the truthfulness of his statements. A second interrogation yielded the same frustratingly uncertain results. As the shadows of Stacy's past collided with the uncertainty of the present, the truth remained tantalizingly out of reach. While suspicion around Ben grew, the lack of concrete evidence left detectives unable to firmly link him to the crime. Experts attempted to analyze hair samples found on Stacy's bed, hoping for a breakthrough. But the limitations of DNA technology in 1985 meant no definitive match could be made. Ben became a prime suspect, but Stacy's family strongly defended his character, describing him as kind, caring, and incapable of such violence. Without solid proof, the police had no choice but to let the case against Ben remain unresolved, and the search for answers dragged on. As the investigation stalled, detectives decided to revisit the case materials, meticulously combing through every detail they had collected. In doing so, they stumbled upon a crucial clue that had previously gone unnoticed. While re-examining the cut in the mosquito netting, they spotted something shocking, something that would turn the entire investigation on its head.
You could see where a sharp object was inserted because the fibers of the screen were pointing outward rather than inward.
The fibers on the cut mosquito netting were pointing outward, a seemingly minor detail that carried significant implications. It indicated that the killer hadn't entered through the window as previously suspected, but rather was already inside the room. This revelation shattered the entire theory of a break-in. If the perpetrator hadn't used the window, they must have gained access with a key or through one of the dormitory residents. Yet this too seemed improbable, as the building was monitored by a guard stationed at the entrance, keeping track of everyone coming and going. Months dragged on without any major breakthroughs. The case grew colder and frustration mounted. Just when it seemed like the investigation had hit an insurmountable dead end, a fresh perspective brought renewed hope. The lead detective reached out to Sheriff Stephen Rhodes of Illinois, a renowned expert in neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. Rhodes was celebrated for his ability to read subtle language and thought patterns, enabling him to detect deception and extract critical information, even from the most elusive suspects. Sheriff Rhodes agreed to take on the case and began by interrogating 4 individuals who were close to Stacy: her roommate, Amy Wheeler, her neighbor, Stephanie Alexander, her ex-boyfriend, Ben Cox, and her current boyfriend, Tommy Osborne. His approach was methodical, his reputation for uncovering truths casting a spotlight of anticipation over the stalled investigation. On September 18, 1986, Rhodes began his interrogations. Amy was the first to be questioned. She provided a detailed and consistent account of the events she remembered, and Rhodes found no reason to doubt her statements. Her responses were straightforward, devoid of hesitation or contradiction, clearing her of any immediate suspicion. Next, Rhodes turned his attention to Stephanie, Stacy's next-door neighbor, whose account would add another layer to the unfolding mystery. With each interrogation, the case crept closer to exposing the truth that had eluded investigators for so long.
At the early stages, she was being very honest. Her body language was expressive. But then she started to talk about the time when the murder might have happened.
Stephanie claimed that she had taken codeine tablets, an anti-inflammatory pain medication, and gone to bed around 12:30 a.m. She recalled hearing Stacy and her friends return to the dormitory, their voices carrying loudly through the walls. Frustrated, she admitted to asking them to quiet down before going back to sleep. Her account seemed mundane, yet Sheriff Rhodes' instincts told him something wasn't right. Subtle inconsistencies in her tone and body language hinted at more beneath the surface. Driven by his sharp intuition and expertise in neuro-linguistic programming, Rhodes pressed on with relentless, probing questions. As the interrogation intensified, Stephanie's composure began to crack. What initially appeared to be a routine interview was about to take a shocking turn. In a stunning twist, Stephanie broke down and confessed to a series of events that no one had anticipated. Her admission unraveled a dark and unexpected truth, one that would completely change the trajectory of the investigation and provide the breakthrough detectives had been searching for. The confession revealed motives and details that had eluded even the most experienced investigators, shedding light on the mystery surrounding Stacy's tragic death.
I asked her to start at a certain point in the day and walk me through your activities throughout the entire evening. At the early stages, she was being very honest. Her body language was expressive. But then she started to talk about the time when the murder might have happened. All of a sudden, there was a little red flag. Going, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Her whole style of communication changed just dramatically. She wasn't answering the question anymore. The things she was saying weren't true. She was lying about what she was doing. She was hiding something. Whatever it was, I just wanted to get to the truth.
Sheriff Rhodes pressed Stephanie aggressively, his sharp instincts honing in on subtle inconsistencies in her story. He accused her of withholding the truth, urging her to come clean. Stephanie clung to her initial account, insisting she had gone to bed after asking Stacy and her friends to lower their voices. But Rhodes, unrelenting in his pursuit of answers, continued to apply pressure, dissecting her every word and reaction. Eventually, under the weight of his questioning, Stephanie's resolve began to falter. Her insistence wavered, and she finally admitted to something she had kept hidden. After Stacy's friends left the dormitory, she had returned to Stacy's room. This admission marked a significant shift in the investigation, opening the door to questions about what had really happened that night, and what role Stephanie might have played in the events leading to Stacy's tragic death.
It was totally contrary to her saying she'd never seen Stacy and that she'd gone directly to bed. She put herself on the crime scene at the time of the murder.
This admission, coming nearly a year after Stacy's murder, left detectives stunned. After months of stalled progress and dead ends, Stephanie's unexpected confession peeled back the first layer of denial surrounding the case. Yet what followed next would shake the investigation to its very core. As Rhodes pressed further, Stephanie hesitated, her emotions betraying the weight of what she was about to reveal. In a surprising twist, her next revelation left the detectives utterly shocked. What they heard was far beyond anything they had anticipated. The room fell silent as she began to disclose a series of events that reframed everything they thought they knew about the case. This was the breakthrough that would finally unlock the dark truth behind Stacy's tragic end.
She looked at me and she goes, "You can read my mind, can't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I can." And she goes, "Then you know I did it."
He said, "You need to come in here." And I asked him why. He said, because the girl sitting in the room is the one that had killed Stacy. I sat there for a minute and I said, "What did you just say?" She had been interviewed time and time and time again, and she was always helpful. She had even called and wanted to know how was everything going on in the case.
During a tense pause in the questioning, Stephanie finally broke her silence and confessed how an innocent encounter had spiraled into a nightmare. She admitted to entering Stacy's room that night for what she described as a casual chat. However, the conversation quickly shifted to Stacy's boyfriend, Tommy Osborne. Stephanie claimed she had complimented Tommy, remarking on his looks and saying he was fine. According to Stephanie, these comments struck a nerve with Stacy, who became visibly upset and jealous. Stacy demanded that Stephanie stay away from Tommy, and the conversation escalated into a heated argument. What began as a verbal clash quickly turned physical. Stephanie alleged that Stacy slapped her, and in a moment of anger, she slapped her back. Tensions boiled over when, as Stephanie claimed, Stacy threatened her, saying, "I'd better not see you hanging around him. I'll kill you, do you hear me?" Moments later, Stacy allegedly slapped her again and began to lunge at her. The argument turned into a physical struggle, escalating into a violent confrontation neither could have anticipated. In the chaos, Stephanie grabbed the wooden rifle, the same one Stacy had used in the marching band. What followed was a series of actions Stephanie described as instinctive and panicked. In a moment of rage and fear, the confrontation took a deadly turn, culminating in unimaginable horror. Stephanie's shocking confession not only unraveled the mystery surrounding Stacy's death, but also reframed the narrative from one of premeditation to a tragic escalation of tempers. Detectives, though shaken by the revelation, now faced the task of piecing together her account with the physical evidence to determine the full truth.
Stephanie hit Stacy with a band rifle and knocked her down on the bed. Stacy got back up. At that point, she says, "I hit her again and again." I kept hitting her. She had admitted to hitting her at least 4 times.
Stephanie's confession took an even darker turn as she revealed a side of herself no one had expected. Consumed by a mix of fear and aggression, she admitted to repeatedly striking Stacy with the wooden rifle in the heat of the moment until Stacy lay motionless on the floor. The realization of what she had done quickly set in, and panic overwhelmed her. Desperate to cover up her actions, Stephanie said she locked the bedroom door and began frantically cleaning herself up. She washed the blood off her hands and, in a calculated move, staged the scene to look like a break-in and violent attack. Stephanie cut a small hole in the mosquito netting, hoping to mislead investigators into believing the killer had entered through the window. Her chilling admission painted a horrifying picture of the events that unfolded that night. Detectives were left grappling with the grim truth. What had initially seemed like a premeditated crime by an unknown assailant was, in reality, a fatal escalation of a personal conflict spiraling out of control. Stephanie's actions, both during and after the murder, exposed a shocking capacity for deception and manipulation as she tried to erase any trace of her guilt.
She cut the screen and actually tore the right side of Stacy's panties and pulled them down to her lower left knee.
Stephanie's confession grew even more chilling as she detailed the extent of her efforts to cover up the crime. After the fatal attack, she meticulously wiped the blood-stained wooden rifle with a towel to remove any evidence. Then she took a shower, washing away the remaining traces of blood from her body. In a desperate attempt to destroy incriminating evidence, Stephanie admitted to burning her bloodied t-shirt and the cut piece of the mosquito netting in the dormitory bathroom. To mask the smoke's odor, she doused the air with heavy perfume before returning to her room. Believing she had covered her tracks, Stephanie went to bed, only to be startled awake by Amy's knocks on Stacy's door. The disturbance shattered the fragile calm she had managed to regain, forcing her to feign ignorance and play the role of a concerned neighbor. Detectives were stunned by Stephanie's confession. For an entire year, the investigation had focused on the theory of a male assailant. No one had imagined that the killer could be a woman, let alone someone as close to Stacy as her dormitory neighbor. The case took a dramatic turn with Stephanie's arrest in 1985, bringing the mystery to a shocking climax. Just 3 days after her arrest, Stephanie made another unsettling move. She wrote a letter to her new boyfriend, whom she had been dating for just a week. The contents of the letter would later provide further insight into her state of mind and her attempts to reconcile the events that had forever altered the lives of those around her.
Let me share with you a letter that you wrote to your boyfriend, Randy.
I'm not going to talk about that.
All right, but this is critical.
I am not going to talk about that. I just will not talk about that.
In this letter to your boyfriend, you say, "Well, Randy, I killed her. I didn't mean to, but I did. It was an accident." Why would you write that to your boyfriend if that weren't true?
They told me to say that because they said if I said I did it in self-defense that they would help me. I can understand why that would be confusing to people to understand.
Confusing isn't the word I would use. It's hard to believe.
In the letter to her new boyfriend, Stephanie recounted the events of that fateful night, claiming the murder was nothing more than a tragic accident. She wrote that she had taken energy pills earlier in the day, which she said had clouded her judgment and impaired her ability to think clearly. Stephanie insisted that she couldn't even recall committing the murder itself, but admitted to being haunted by nightmares over the past year, vivid and terrifying, hinting at a suppressed guilt. However, just as the case seemed to reach its conclusion, it took an unexpected and shocking turn. Stephanie alleged that Sheriff Stephen Rhodes had used his advanced interrogation techniques to hypnotize her during questioning, claiming that he had implanted the confession in her mind. This accusation not only challenged the validity of her confession, but also cast a shadow of doubt over the integrity of the entire investigation. Her claims of coercion and hypnosis raised serious questions, forcing investigators and legal experts to re-examine the methods used during her interrogation. Was her confession truly a reflection of her guilt, or had external pressure played a role in shaping her account of the events? The twist added another layer of complexity to an already convoluted case, leaving both the detectives and Stacy's grieving family searching for definitive answers.
How come you told him that stuff if it wasn't true?
I was scared.
Scared of what?
What they would do to me.
Stephanie staunchly maintained her innocence, claiming she could not have committed the crime and accusing the police of exploiting her vulnerable state to close the case. She argued that the energy pills she had taken on the day of the incident had impaired her judgment and made her susceptible to Sheriff Rhodes's alleged psychological influence. In 1987, a judge convened a 3-day hearing to evaluate the validity of Stephanie's claims. During the hearing, detectives firmly denied any allegations of undue pressure or hypnotic manipulation. They emphasized that Stephanie's confession contained specific and unsettling details only the true murderer could know. The most damning revelation was Stephanie's knowledge of the precise location of the knife used to cut the mosquito netting, information that had not been made public. This knife, which had eluded investigators during the initial search, was discovered under a pile of clothes in the closet after her confession. While this revelation seemed to directly tie Stephanie to the crime, her defense lawyers pointed out potential complications. As neighbors, Stacy and Stephanie frequently entered each other's rooms, which could explain her knowledge of the knife's location. Furthermore, there was no definitive evidence to conclusively link the knife to the cut in the mosquito netting. Ultimately, the judge ruled that Stephanie's confession had not been obtained through coercion, hypnosis, or manipulation, and the case moved forward to trial in 1988. The prosecution presented its case against Stephanie, painting a picture of a violent outburst that ended in tragedy. However, Stephanie's defense team quickly countered, highlighting the lack of concrete physical evidence tying her directly to the crime. The trial became a battleground of conflicting narratives, with both sides scrutinizing every detail. While the prosecution focused on the confession and the disturbing specifics it revealed, the defense cast doubt on its reliability, arguing that it lacked substantiation and could not stand alone as proof of guilt. The courtroom drama captured public attention as the case teetered on the edge of justice and uncertainty, with the ultimate verdict hanging in the balance.
He argued that Steve Rhodes comes in with his neuro-linguistic interrogation technique, which they said also was a form of hypnosis, that Steve Rhodes suggested details of the crime to Stephanie.
Sheriff Rhodes took the stand for the prosecution, asserting that subtle eye movements could reveal deception, a technique he had employed during Stephanie's interrogation. However, Stephanie's attorneys fiercely contested the validity of this claim, arguing that such methods lack scientific credibility and were therefore inadmissible in court. They bolstered their case with medical evidence, suggesting that the energy pills Stephanie had consumed on the day of the incident could have impaired her cognitive abilities, potentially making her more susceptible to manipulation or suggestion. In an unexpected move, the prosecution introduced a psychological sciences expert to conduct a courtroom experiment aimed at addressing Stephanie's claims of being hypnotized. The expert attempted to demonstrate the plausibility of inducing a confession under hypnosis by trying to hypnotize Stephanie in front of the jury. The goal was to prove that such manipulation was unlikely in the circumstances described and to undermine her allegations against Rhodes. This unconventional demonstration sparked intense debate. Stephanie's defense team argued that the courtroom experiment was theatrical and irrelevant, asserting that it failed to replicate the psychological pressure she may have faced during the actual interrogation. Meanwhile, the prosecution used the expert's testimony to emphasize that Stephanie's confession was consistent with evidence only the true perpetrator would know, regardless of her claims of impaired judgment or coercion. The trial became a dramatic clash of psychological theories, legal strategies, and competing narratives, leaving the jury to grapple with a case that balanced on the fine line between science, law, and human vulnerability.
Was basically a very good hypnotic subject. What it means to be a good hypnotic subject is that a person is suggestible, easily influenced by other people to believe things that may or may not be true.
I took everything that he said to me, put it in a fashion, or made up a lot of it.
During the trial, the victims' relatives delivered testimonies that painted a troubling picture of Stephanie's character. They described her as a problematic individual, and some even revealed that Stacy had expressed fear of her in the past. This testimony added weight to the prosecution's case and underscored the volatile nature of the relationship between the two women. On January 25, 1988, following a 3-week trial, Stephanie was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The verdict, while offering some closure, left lingering questions about the full truth of what had transpired. Stephanie served 9 years of her sentence before being released on parole, a contentious outcome that reignited debates about the case. Even after her conviction and years behind bars, Stephanie's fight for exoneration was far from over. She continued to maintain her innocence, asserting that her confession had been coerced and that she was the victim of a deeply flawed investigation. Upon her release, she enlisted a new legal team to reinvestigate the case, determined to uncover evidence that would clear her name. Stephanie's ongoing efforts to challenge her conviction left many unresolved questions in the minds of the public and those involved in the case. Was justice truly served, or had critical details been overlooked? As Stephanie pursued a path to prove her innocence, the shadow of the tragedy continued to loom, keeping the case alive in both legal and public discourse.
I have decided to speak with you today because I want my side of the story to be told. I did not kill Stacy Diane Panel.
What happened then when you sat down with him?
I came in and he just started with a normal set of questions like, tell me your name, how old you are, that kind of thing. Not even necessarily me, just somebody. They had to get somebody on this crime.
Investigators say you confessed to killing Stacy Panel, that you walk them through the crime step by step.
No, ma'am, that's not true.
What's in it for police?
They had pressure from the school to solve the case. They needed to find somebody, and they need to find them now.
The case took a dramatic turn when Stephanie's new legal team uncovered unsettling evidence that cast doubt on the original verdict. Their investigation unearthed a chilling connection to another murder that occurred in 1993. The case involved Charles Ray Crawford, a man convicted and sentenced to death for attacking a young woman just 40 minutes away from Northeast Mississippi Community College, the very same institution Stacy had attended. What made this discovery particularly alarming was the striking similarity between the two crimes. In Crawford's case, he had gained entry to his victim's home by cutting a hole in the mosquito netting, a detail eerily reminiscent of the evidence found in Stacy's murder. The parallels raised a deeply troubling possibility. Could Crawford have been responsible for Stacy's death? Stephanie and her legal team advanced this theory, suggesting that Crawford's known methods and proximity to the college made him a plausible suspect. However, proving his involvement posed significant challenges, as there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime scene from nearly a decade earlier. Amid these revelations, a crucial discovery further complicated the case. Forensic analysis of the wooden rifle used in Stacy's murder revealed a single drop of blood that did not match Stacy's. This finding raised serious questions about the original investigation and the assumption that the weapon exclusively bore traces of Stacy and Stephanie. The emergence of these new details breathed fresh life into the case, sparking renewed debate about whether justice had truly been served. While the evidence against Crawford remained circumstantial, the implications of his potential involvement opened a new chapter in the enduring mystery of Stacy's tragic death. For Stephanie, this was a glimmer of hope in her long-standing fight to clear her name, but it also deepened the complexity of a case that continued to haunt everyone involved.
I determined that it was human blood that was different from the blood that I analyzed for Stacy Panel. So immediately that tells me that's not Stacy Panel's blood. That's blood there that was never identified.
At the time, advanced DNA analysis had not been conducted, as a comprehensive case review was required to move forward. However, independent experts managed to extract a DNA sample from the victim's underwear, revealing the presence of an unidentified male. This critical piece of evidence hinted at a possible link to Stacy's murder, but remained inconclusive until it could be compared with Charles Crawford's DNA, a step pending due to the need for a full case reassessment. Stephanie's lawyers argued fervently for Crawford's potential involvement, pointing to his proximity to the college at the time of the murder and testimony from two witnesses who claimed to have seen him near the campus days before the crime. Despite these claims, no reliable confirmation of his presence at the scene existed. The similarities between the two cases were undeniable, but significant discrepancies remained. The cut in the mosquito netting, for instance, was determined to have been made from inside the room outward, contradicting the theory of an intruder entering from the outside. Additionally, Crawford's height of 6'1" made it improbable that he could have maneuvered through the small opening in the netting. Another critical inconsistency was the use of Stacy's wooden rifle as the murder weapon. If Crawford had been involved, it seemed unlikely he would have relied on a weapon that wasn't his own, particularly one tied so closely to the victim. Stephanie and her legal team continued their fight for a case review to compare the existing evidence with Crawford's DNA. Crawford, who remained on death row until his death in April 2021, had even been questioned by detectives regarding Stacy's murder. However, the police could never confirm his presence near the college on the night of the crime, leaving his potential involvement shrouded in doubt. As we close the unsettling story of Stacy Panel, the mystery continues to linger. While someone has been held accountable, lingering questions cast a shadow over the case. Was true justice served, or was this a case of misplaced blame to close an investigation? We want to hear your thoughts. Did the right person pay for this crime, or is there more to uncover? Drop a comment below and let us know what you think. If you enjoyed this story, consider joining our membership for exclusive perks and to support the channel.